Welcome back to the Jackie Griffin Show, and we are still joined live on set with Mr. Chris Richardson, and we are so excited. And before we went to break, Darnell had asked him a question about families. Tell us what you're doing with that, or tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, that's, you know what, guys, that's my new passion now. So here I am now, 5 years out of divorce, and I'm actually dating now. Mm-hmm. And so my girlfriend and I are walking this road for the very first time together. And what I'm learning is there's a lot more complexities this go around than it was the first time 17 years ago.
Right.
And so with that comes a new knowledge and understanding real quick, because 2 out of 3 relationships that get into that go through the blended family, they fail. So knowing that up front, it's important that we become as equipped as we can to succeed if this is going to go from dating to courtship to marriage. And so we are endeavoring now. I brought into my show on Blog Radio, we just did a series on the blended family. And we refer to it as the step family, as our psychologist who came in, Dr. Lofus, who came in. Jeanette Lofus is a known psychologist. She's been doing this for over 30 years. She's in step. She's got 4 stepchildren, her own biological daughter through her marriage. She's been married over 30 years with 30 years of credentialing, and she teaches other therapists and psychologists about step families.
Right.
And there's nothing like it. It's completely different than a biological family.
What are the most challenges that you see the doctor researchers find in blended families when they come together?
Well, the first thing is that there's a lot, and it's really about getting understanding and getting clarity, because it's, when you initially go down this road, there's a lot of myths and fallacies that, this is going to be okay. But with a blended family, you cannot predict what you cannot predict, because anything at any given time can happen. And what happens is that typically that step parent coming into the equation now is coming into more of a volatile situation where the children may not like them. And it could turn at any given time. And so it's kind of like being in a combat environment. You're prepared for this, but the enemy hits you with that.
Right.
And so it's learning how to quickly
identify,
adapt, and overcome as one team. The problem then becomes is that our communication becomes a greater gap within that. Okay, well, you said this, and we get into our emotions and we act out on our feelings. And it's fine. I'm not saying that, and the doctor talked about not dismissing feelings. It's important. But if you are a Christian, we understand through our word that we don't live our life according to feelings.
Right.
We are to conduct our life according to faith-based principles.
Correct.
Because a feeling will lead you down the wrong road every single time, because it's a reaction.
Exactly.
And so the feeling of fear, anxiety, all that starts to kick in. And so with the blended family, Darnell, Jackie, it's a challenge, because now you're coming into the situation, if you've never had children before, you're coming into someone where you've got to embrace their situation, all their flaws, idiosyncrasies, and everything else. And not only that, you're not the parent. You're not the biological parent. So will they accept you? Can you deal with rejection? And how does that look? And then when you get into your feelings, then a big thing within any relationship is the feeling of selfishness. That selfishness, the feeling of fear, which produces selfishness. And that's the number one killer in relationships. It's not always about finances. Finances is a result of selfishness.
Right.
And so when we get into a relationship, the design is to be more Christ-like. But the challenge is that we cannot do that and walk in the world when we're not walking in the Word. And we've got to be equipped in that. We've got to know, listen, I did this show really to bring awareness, not only for myself, but I brought in one of the most known. This lady's been on Oprah. She's met with presidents. I mean, she's well documented. So I said, I want to bring her in as the key leading expert, because she's written several books and audios that are still the #1 bestsellers out there in the arena of step parenting. And she broke a lot of things down to us, talking about the children, talking about the different experiences. She talked from her lens, of course, and she's been doing this for so long. But we come in, as I said, with a misunderstanding. Well, this is how it's going to be. And then what happens is that when a child acts out this way, you feel as though, well, wait a minute, what are you going to do, Dad? Or what are you going to do, Mom? And you feel as though that you don't have a voice. And so with that, you start to suffer in silence.
I see, just like even with the biological parents, where the child play one parent against the other, and in a blended family, it's more, because now that child has that biological father or that mother go to that parent and say, Mom, I don't really like him. He don't likes me because he won't allow me to get away with murder, when the fact that you know that you're grounded in structure and you're trying to discipline from a biblical and from a worldly standpoint, trying to discipline that child, but mom can't see it. But you know, then you can see the difference when raising a child, a boy, a man child, that you can see the difference in raising them than a woman can. So all the little games they playing with their mom, we know that it ain't gonna work with us. But the mom has to grow to see that. So sometimes you have conflict when the father, stepfather, or the father trying to discipline his child. Mom see the Oprah Winfrey timeout. Dad ain't having timeouts. We're time in. So with that perspective, what are some of the keys that you see with that example I gave you, how families relate to those issues?
Well, you got to understand here, first of all, children, we're no different than children. At the end of the day, you know, a lot of times, you said earlier, we don't come with a manual. You don't know how this situation is going to play out. And so you have to be careful that you don't be reactionary versus being responsive. And so a child is looking for three letters that I say all begin with the letter I. They're looking for independence, identity, and not their significance, but their and not information. It just drew a blank on that. But they're looking for those three key things: independence, not information, but within that. Okay, I'm having a senior moment.
That's okay. That's okay.
Identity and in that, and so what they struggle with is that, wait a minute, I want my independence. You know, I'm looking now for this identity over here. I got a daughter that's a freshman in high school, and so she's going through her own stage of things. Now she's playing out, though, that some things, because mom and dad are not together in the same household, so we try to have similarities in rules, but at the end of the day, she knows, well, I can pick up the phone if I'm not happy here, and I can call over there.
Right.
So what the parents have to do is to learn how to effectively co-parent in the midst of their pains and their conflicts.
Right.
You talk about conflict. Most conflict it start externally, most conflict starts internally.
Right.
And it's that internal conflict, well, we start thinking, oh man, this is going to be worse than what it really is. And a lot of times in our mind, we do the doom and gloom. We paint a picture without seeking God, without understanding that we get on our knees about it, and without really processing what's happening here in the grand scheme of things. So when it plays out in step family, we play out of step versus in step.
Right.
And so it's important that you set ground rules. This is how this is going to go down. Now, here's the challenge, though, Darnell and Jackie, that oftentimes the parents who weren't parenting in the beginning with rules are now trying to create new rules.
Now, say that again.
That's the challenge.
Say that again.
There were never any rules to begin with.
Right.
But now you want to go back and create these rules when all of a sudden now you're asking your child to get in step and get in alignment with that. That becomes a problem for the child because it's not consistent. I'm guilty of it. You know, I'm really guilty of it, because oftentimes what happens when we men go through divorce, what that experience is like is we feel is already that naturally the parent, the mother is going to get custody of the children. 9 times out of 10, if it comes down to that, the mother will. So the man is almost kind of put out the pasture. And in the relationship, you know, when we talk about, you know, within marriage, there's one head. Well, here now, when we go through a structure of divorce, you kind of have like 2 heads in it, because, you know, you were the head of your household over here, I'm the head of my household over here. And so to the child, they're confused because, well, do I go to mom or do I go to dad? So what they do is they play both. Right. And so it creates inconsistency already within that dynamic. And so here we play this thing out, you know, you want to put rules in place. You want to put structures in place. And children need consistency. And I'm learning that now because this is forcing me to deal with it. But as a father, for so long, for the past 5 years, I've felt as though that I didn't have a voice. There's so many men that are out there because too often that women who are bruised, broken, and bitter, they will use the children as a pawn to get the man's attention. And a man feels as though in any state that he's in, I'm damned if I do and damned if I don't. Right. So almost to the point, why bother? I engage you to be involved in my child's life and you shut me out. And so then that looks different. Then the mom comes back at Darnell and Jackie and she says, hey, you're not involved in the child's life. You're not contributing to this, this, and other. The one way to tear down a man is to break his ego. Okay? If you want to tear him down, you stick that needle, when we talked about earlier, you stick that needle of injection of doubt into him and saying, look, you were never this to begin with. You speak down on him, you'll crush his ego. His ego's only this big anyway. His pride is yay big to fit into the room. It barely has enough between the two of you all to fit in the house. That's right. But his ego is only this big.
Kickstand, hold his head or something.
That's it. As soon as you step on that thing, you got problems. And so
Right.
when you're now in a split blended family situation or a split household before you even start to blend, you're now dealing with what we call in a relationship the power struggle. And it happens in relationships when you're married, and it also still continues when you're out of a relationship because your voice wants to be heard. Well, this is the way I would like to do things, and yet she's fighting you over here. So it's called the natural power struggle.
Now, and to add to that is that, you know, Tyler Perry makes a lot of good movies, and he has some movies where he brought in blended families. And one of the characters, Marcus, you know, Marcus is the big strong guy, and his wife are always fighting with his ex-girlfriend about their children. And you see him going back and forth, and then Marcus finally stood up and said, you know what, I'm tired of this. He threatened to leave his current wife because his ex-wife was trying to always cause conflict. So he set both of them down and gave them the rules of engagement, how that we're going to move forward with our children. And I thought it was excellent because now, you know, with the expectation, which should have been done in the beginning when they first came together, what is the expectation of both parents now that they separated, but now we're moving together on one accord, and that's to raise that child.
The challenge, though, with that, Darnell, and that's a great point that you bring up, he was able to do that, but conflict was still there. And so I remember in one of the movies, I just recently watched it, they were outside and in front of the child. You know, he's talking to, you know, his ex and talking to the wife and saying, enough, you know, and
Exactly.
so he's got to be the mediator. The problem then becomes when emotions get involved and when they don't get checked at the door.
Right.
And then we have a greater issue because now you got his attention, he was never this to me, and all of a sudden he becomes this to you that he was never to me. And so then that creates a lot of animosity. You know, you are a better man now because before you said you didn't know how to become a father. So now you get into a new relationship, you have children, if that be the case, and now all of a sudden to the child, you know, to Darnell Jr., it's like, well, wait a minute, my dad was never that to me. And so now you create a different level of challenge and conflict that created within that relationship. So now you have to go back and figure out, how do I still connect with him? How do I bond with him to let him know, son, I didn't know how to be yet a man, yet alone to be a father.
Right.
And that's the challenge. And I just had a memory reoccurrence here. With the three letters I was looking for was image, identity, and independence.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, I had that aha moment. I call it my senior moment. You'll see that in a minute when our 66-year-old gets up here.
On that note.
I think you're absolutely right because I have a brother-in-law who had kind of that similar situation, you know, and he wound up marrying someone, and then he had 2 kids with his first wife, and so they divorced, and then he married another lady, and now him and that lady have 2 children, and he has 2 sons with the new wife, and he has 2 sons with the first wife. And somewhere in, I call it in translation, the kid, the oldest kid, who's actually named after him, feels that he kind of abandoned them, and he's taken on this new family, and he's everything to those boys, and yet him and his mother are the ones that got slighted because he was not that way in his mind to them. So now these 2 other boys, his brothers, are benefiting in ways that he feels that he should have benefited. So now he has he's in college now and all that stuff, and he doesn't want anything to do with his father. He doesn't want his father around him. He doesn't want his father to come to none of the events. His father still goes though, and
That's good.
he still goes, even though the child isn't one there. And he has that bitterness towards, and not just his dad, towards everybody in his dad's family, you know, and I feel that the reasoning behind it is because of the mother and what she, in those prominent years, had instilled in that kid. Because I feel that she had that power to say, you know what, Dad and I didn't make it, but he's still your father.
And you know, one thing I can say about my oldest brother, my oldest nieces, Carolyn would tell her daughters, by my nieces, that no matter what your father did, that's your father. And whether your father was there, whether he was in your life, out of your life, that's your father, respect him. And to this day, my nieces in their 40s, and I remember that quote so vividly when she told them that, and they respect their father as of today, and they're more closer than ever before. And what Jackie is saying is that, you, like we said earlier about the poison dart, just a little venom goes a long way. And T.D. Jakes had this thing, so I can love the hell out of you when nothing but hell in you. So I got to just show you, keep loving you. and it is going to love. And I can remember this quote from Denzel. I love Denzel Washington. When he was the young man when he was writing the book, he was locked up in a hurricane. He said, "Hatred put me in, but love is going to bust us out, and love is going to have to bust him out as well." And I think once he opened up and found out he's going to need his father, and that's when love, everything that he was holding, is then going to come out, and he's going to reveal it in anger to his father. He has to get it out, and then then healing is going to start.
Listen, this is critical. It's key for us to understand the role of the father. Mm-hmm. The role, everything birthed from the father. Mm-hmm. Is significant that we as men, you mentioned this earlier in the show, talking about our vertical alignment. When a man's vertical alignment is right, his horizontal relations will be right, because it has a better chance. So in other words, I'm doing the things that I need to do. I'm spending time in devotion every day in the Word, reading Scripture to understand what's God's divine plan. Am I hearing the voice of God? We got to learn how to hear the voice of God. Right. Pastor Jenkins from First Baptist did an excellent teaching on that. He talked about at least 10 different ways, and he has it on audio for the listeners out there. They can get that at First Baptist, of how to hear the voice of God versus the voice of the enemy. And it's being clear, because a lot of times we come up with these ideas of what we want to do, and that's what we want to do.
Right.
But what has God said? So I'd say it's important for us to understand where we're going as men. A woman will never mind following a man as long as she knows that he's not a parked car. So at the end of the day, if he has a directive, he has a mission, he knows where he's going.
My parked car. Go on with it.
Parked car.
You can't, parked car don't move. Who wants to follow parked car?
Who wants to follow it? And that's how we have to understand it. But what she has to also do is that men respond to things. I talked about the ego. Mm-hmm. Men respond to respect and honor. That's key. Honor and respect are critical in the
Similar to the military code, right?
And respect. You know, if his commanding officer walks into the room, what do? We honor him and respect him or her by the position that they hold. You don't have to like the person, but you got to respect the position.
Correct.
This man is in the child's life as the father, yet he may not have had any positive examples.
Hold on 1 second. I'm getting a collection plate. You're going to take it off.
He may not have had any positive role models in there. So what we have to do is we got to really get better at understanding the history.
Right.
When we make a connection, oftentimes we make that connection based off what our desire is, maybe not necessarily God's plan for us. So what I always say to women and to men is, what has God told you and what is God showing you about this other individual? Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, you can agree to disagree, but what is God showing you? That means that you've got to learn how to hear clearly the voice of God. Because if you don't hear the voice of God, you'll follow the desire of your flesh. Yeah. And what happens is it starts then, you plant the seed, and once the seed grows, the flesh can never get enough and the spirit can never have enough.
That's right.
And so you continue to say, oh, I'm going to do things this way, because that's the pattern. We get caught up in the patterns, and we go back to our history of, well, my mom was a drug addict, and my father was. We have the opportunity
to break that curse.
Break the curse.
Break that curse right there. Right.
But in order to change the thinking, we've got to inject something new versus something old. Mm-hmm. And so that means you got to do something different. I might have to go to church more than just on a Sunday and just sit in the pew. Because Sunday to Sunday ain't enough. Right. You know, I'm a heathen, turned inside out, but at the end of the day, I know that I got to go on Sunday, I got to get a word on Tuesday. Tuesday may carry me maybe past Wednesday, midday Wednesday. You follow me?
Put a tape on Thursday.
That's it. That's all it is. It's kind of like, giving a wheel a tic-tac. I need more.
Right.
It's not going to fill me up and sustain me, so I need something to sustain me. But I have to take the initiative on my own to get in a workshop, to get in a Bible-based teaching, or to get in some discipleship group, so that I can learn the word, so that I can become better. Right,
because we're on this earth to develop dynamic disciples.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about that. We were talking earlier, and I know we were talking just a minute ago about the importance of fathers, so I want to drill that down. To understand the role of the father, it started with Adam and the father.
Right, before you jump on that point, it brings to what you said, hearing the voice of God and not the enemy. But sometimes you have to deliver yourself from the enemy, which is the enemy. Because we can be our worst enemy. Absolutely. Not the person out there, but the person in you. Yes. So if you can deliver yourself from the inner enemy, which is the inner man or inner woman in you, you'll be a better person.
But here's the thing, Darnell, it's a good point you say, but we can't do it ourselves.
That's right.
What we have to get to the realization is that I can't do this alone.
Right.
Because my flesh is going to eat me up every time. This is 1 Thessalonians 5:23. I love talking about this. It talks about body, soul, and spirit. Mm-hmm. This the I
That's the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost.
This thing right here, this flesh, oh man, this is hell. You know, at the end of the day, because it has its desires, I see something walking by, you know, it doesn't take much is what I'm saying.
That's right.
And so it's got to understand the soul.
I went that way with it, I think.
Yeah, the soul is your mind, your will, and your emotions. You
Right.
got to understand the dynamic and the makeup of that, and then the spirit. So it doesn't all come together just because I'm born here. You have to be born again.
Right.
You know, and so that means you have to develop that relationship with the Father. Again, coming back to the Father. That is the foundation of a successful relationship within and external. And so that means that I've got to now learn how to become intradependent, not dependent, not codependent, okay, on it. So I got to learn how to be interdependent with God.
And that scenario you're using is in life as well as using, you know, a lot of people, not taking away from public assistance or anything, but you never want to be dependent on anything that gives you, that controls you. You want to get on that lifeline where God can intervene, because it's like an olive, you have to be crushed. And once you crush, you can be squeezed, and God can sift you and use you in any ways He see fit. And you use, like you said, don't let your circumstances be your desire and be the point where you say, oh, I'm going to give up, I'm going to give in. Get a hand up, not a hand out. And that's a good point.
Never let your pride poison your purpose. At the end of the day, that's what it all comes down to. We get so prideful. You know, if you're on a social system or whatever, it is a means to a way, not a means to an end. You know, so it's a temporary thing, and that's what we have to look at. What happens is so much of us, we get crushed by, it doesn't seem that there's any hope. And that's why it's so essential that you got to look to the Father of all hope. And if we don't have a vertical alignment, then this horizontal thing, because it's eye gate, ear gate, everything we hear, we do, it poisons the soul. And it means that in order for my spirit to come alive, I got to get closer to His spirit.
Right.
Okay. So I've got to yield and be willing. Oftentimes in relationships, once I get hurt, I run into what's natural. You know, we have this natural thing. Dr. Caroline Leaf, she talks about she's a neuroscientist who does religion and neuroscience together. And I've studied her materials and information. That's part of my boot camp that I talked about. We talk about a lot about mind control, just like the beginning of the Matrix, you know, and where he talks about meeting Neo, you know, and he's there saying, you know, you have a choice. You can choose the red pill or the blue pill. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you have a choice too. You have a choice to choose the red pill or the blue pill, one or the other. So it's not the choices that kill you, it's your decisions that do.
You go down Romans Road or the wrong road.
You got to read the blog. We're talking about that, and it's giving a specific directive, because I'm using in this particular blog, I'm painting a big picture. Your kingdom assignment is all essential to God's kingdom mission. And so what has to happen is this show could not work without the two of you all together, per se. Yeah, sure, you were absent last week and Jackie carried the load, but it started with a vision with both of you. God has a purpose and a plan and a vision for all of us. And when we get into these relationships, we got to understand it comes together like this. And we've got to understand that means you have an assignment, just like the military. And I'm using this example of a movie, Jarhead 2. Here you see in this movie that is played out, the directors write in and say they're in a combat environment, just like we are today in life. We're in a combat environment. It's called spiritual warfare. And what we have to do is to understand that the mission that He's given us, every one of us has a responsibility, we have a task, we have an assignment. And we have got to really understand that and get that down in our heart.
Yes, sir. In
order to carry out the mission. So what happens in the movie, it's real short. The team is on a resupply mission. They're on a I'm going somewhere with that. They're on a resupply mission.
Come on, Rick.
To resupply, refurbish the combat troops that are out there fighting, the water, the things that they need. They're giving them the things that they need in order to survive. Some of y'all just missed that.
But you gave them what they need, not what they wanted.
What they need in this environment to survive. So here we are, they get attacked. Most of the time in life, you're getting attacked. Sometimes it's enemy fire, sometimes it's friendly fire.
Or spiritual fire.
But at the end of the day, they have an assignment. So it's critical that while you have that assignment, that you've got to know your purpose and God's plan. You can only do that through spending time with Him. Jackie and Darnell can only do this show and know each other's idiosyncrasies by spending time so that they can be in synchronicity with one another. If they're not, there's going to be a gap. So what happens is one or the other has to pull the load. I'm tired of seeing people walking around broken, bruised, and confused, and somebody else having to carry the load for each other. You know, and so what God is doing is saying, hey, it's time for us to walk forward in our purpose and our assignment. He said, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. He said, and then he talked about Jeremiah 29:11. I know what I put in you. Thoughts of
Exactly.
good and not of evil. Then in Romans
Yeah.
8:28, you talked about Romans. You know,
Right.
that all things. So yet you went through divorce, yet you've gone through a broken situation with your children that it was mended, but God can step in and fix that thing in the midnight hour when you least expect it.
Now, if you want Bishop Richardson to come to your church, because for those who just tuned in, we're talking to Chris Richardson, outstanding man of God, author, book writer, and phenomenal man. And for those, would you give me your website, Bishop?
Listen, I want you all to follow and connect with me. The website is Real Talk. That's right, Real Talk with Chris Richardson. It's that for a reason, Darnell and Jackie, because we talk about real issues that impact daily walk and struggle of life, and it's real. They say the struggle is real. So Real Talk with Chris Richardson. Listen to some of the archive shows. I bring in other experts. It's not me talking just loosely based. I bring in documented experts, and you didn't have to pay them. But what I always tell people, Darnell, is don't self-medicate off the show. That means if your issue is so real, don't sit there and not get help, because there's help available.
Yes, sir. Wow. Well, I know our audience got a lot today.
Definitely, and it's so real what he's saying. What he was saying about, basically, I took it as you have to know your role, and in a relationship, especially with husband and wife. And you know, over the years, you know, people always ask us how you raised your kids or how you raised, you know, RG3 to be the man that he is. But the thing about it is, we knew our roles. I knew my role. To this day, I still know my role. And there were all seasons in life. And when God puts us in seasons. But as long as you're going through those seasons, you have to know what your role is. My role was always to be the supporter. So whatever my husband said was going to be the course for that day, that's what's going to be the course for that day. But I did not go along with it in bitterness. Okay, Lord, this is what your word says. Your word says he's the head. So I got to trust that he's not going to put us in a predicament that is going to be unsafe for us or whatever. So I understood my role as I understood his role.
You know, maybe we can get Bishop Richardson come back and do a role on submission.
Boy, I'll write that one right there.
What do you say, Bishop?
I got
But let me tell you something. With submission, in my opinion about submission, you won't have a problem submitting to your spouse if you trust and believe in God.
Right.
If your faith is in God and not that man that God has put in your life as your spouse, he's the head. But really and truly, you have to keep your faith and trust in God. When you switch your faith and trust into a man,
you all messed up.
And then they hurt you, you shouldn't be hurt because your faith and trust should not be
Right. You know, the Bible says submit to one another, and as though we are the head, we also have to submit as well. And if my wife is doing something better than I can do, then I will submit and let her take the lead on that. It's not about being in control. It's about doing the right thing and submitting to one to another. But at the end of the day, God didn't make us the head, and we're not being abusive. And if the man is lining up with the Word of God and he's surrendering to the man of God, then there should be no issue. And we always discuss and go over things that we should make sure that's lining up.
Even if he is not, you know, sometimes we go out here and we make decisions as women to marry men that we know that we are not equally yoked with.
Good girl, bad boys.
Yeah, and
Okay.
so if that's what you chose to see, God's going to honor what you choose.
Right.
Even if God is in your ear saying don't do it and you do it, now you're in marriage. You're in a committed relationship that is ordained, that is honored by God. So that man is still ahead.
Right.
He might be just a messed up joker.
Jack
but
off from the floor.
he is still the head. And what you have to do is continue in your role, and you continue to stroke that ego, and you go to church, and you pray, and all those good things, and you come home and not beat him over the head with it, but you show him what you're getting from the Word of God. And as he watches you, you'll be able to change or turn his head toward the things of God.
You'll see the alignment coming from here.
But what she said, though, was so key. So many listeners are going to miss that. She said you show him. You know, we hear the thing, I'd rather see a leader than hear a leader. Jackie specifically said, show him. That means you have to model what that new behavior looks like. You're going to break a habit. An old habit takes at least 21 days to break. Okay, we know that. That's the statistical number that's put out there. But the key is you cannot just beat a man down. You know, you got to lift him up. And you got to learn how to build them up, because that ego is what? It's just this big, and it doesn't take much. Dr. Lofus mentioned that on the show, the finale we did. She talked about some of the psychological differences, the mental differences between men, biological differences, what you want to refer to it as, between men and women. We talk about left brain, right brain, you know, how we think in the process.
Right.
It's a show that I would encourage, one of our best shows, actually, I think, that everyone should listen to, and they can find it on the archives on the Real Talk with Chris Richardson archives.
Now, in closing, Chris, what would you like to say to the audience? And make sure you give me your website, your blog show, because it's phenomenal. I listen to it. So if you want to give all of your details and information, and there's a button on this website where you can actually have Bishop Richardson come and speak at your church.
Well, I'm honored to be here. I want to thank you guys for having me today. I couldn't have figured a better day and better time to be anywhere but here. So thank you guys.
Thank you for coming.
The opportunity. But if you're listening out there today, look, support them with the show. Tell a friend, tell a neighbor. That's what we want to do. We want to make sure that this show is a success. It can only be that way with your listening ears and sharing the word. So if you found that today there was a seed that was planted in your life, something that was said, something that was done, a good deed, do a good deed and share that message with others of hope. If you want to follow me, you can connect with me on Twitter or Facebook under author Chris Richardson on the Facebook link. Real Talk with Chris Richardson is the website to go to. There are tons of resources there. It should be a resource center for you to go to, whether you're single, dating, married, divorced, it doesn't matter. There's something there for everyone. And remember, when you are better, we are better.
We'll be right back when Jackie gets